Hi, fantasy romance readers. Like many of you, I've been on a big dragon kick lately. I recently read A Delicate Betrayal by Jessaca Willis, and I was hooked. The book has an amazing magic system, some of my favorite tropes, characters I loved, and some I love to hate, and of course, dragons.
I was one of those consumers, though, where I was like, can I get anything other than vampires right now? Like, there was a point, which is how I started writing. So I was like, man, everything is vampires. There's got to be something else. But I now am part of the thought that you can't have enough vampires. Always really been big into games in general, and probably more like dark fantasy kind of video games. So I feel like a lot of the world is very similar in those things. But I'm steeping myself in the D&D world right now. I've been reading the monster manual and just different one shots and trying to play whenever I can too. So
Find out how this new to me author became part of my permanent TBR list. I'm Kelly Chase, and you're listening to the Fantasy Romance Podcast. I'm so happy to meet you. I can't believe we haven't met before now, but I'm truly so excited because you are literally amazing. Like, you do so many crazy things. And so I have so many questions. So the first one might date me a little bit. So if you draw like this utter blank stare, I will know that you have no idea what I'm talking about. Did you, when you were growing up, or maybe like in the archives, because this was like pre-modern television, did you ever watch Circus of the Stars?
no,
See,
I've
there
never heard of it.
blank face. Okay. So here's why I ask. You know, Dancing with the Stars is like really big right now, but like 800 years ago, Circus of the Stars was a thing. And they did all this really cool, like behind the scenes stuff where you would see like, you know, the stars practicing on trapezes and jumping and all that. And so like the closest I've ever gotten to doing anything athletic or gymnastic in any way is like jumping over the back of the couch, like while watching Circus of the Stars 800 years ago. But you are like this multi-talented, like trapeze aerials. Tell me, if you don't mind, like how in the world do you get into such like a death-defying hobby? That is so cool.
In college, when you have no inhibitions. Yeah, I don't know. I always really liked like Cirque du Soleil. My family would go whenever they were in town, or as often as we could. And yeah, I always wondered how people got into that, because it clearly takes so much dedication and like, yeah, just work. And yeah, I don't know. I was walking around campus and I saw like a little flyer up that was like, come take a class with us. I was like, what? You can just do that? And so I went and have been going basically ever since.
So Cirque du Soleil, did you see Cirque du Soleil before you got into doing like aerial? I don't even know what you call it. Is it acrobatics? Is it gymnastics? Like how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think all of those words. What I do is mostly aerial silks, or some people call it fabric or tissue. And yeah, I had seen it a couple times and was always like, how on earth do people do that?
I can't even hear you say tissue, because like you think of someone up in the air, like hanging by a tissue. I'm like, no, that's all right. Worst nightmare.
It's, you know, what's funny is I feel safer on the fabric than I do on the trapeze. And I don't know what that is. I think with trapeze, there's so many more moments where you're kind of just balancing, like, because you could be standing on the bar and like so you're still holding on, but for some reason with the tissue, you're like wrapped around it. You're like death gripping. I'm not letting go.
Well, the trapeze just reminds me of like when you're a kid and you like hold on to the swings and you do all these like flips and moves. It's like, but you're like inches off the ground. That is so exciting. And so like, just, it terrifies me, like literally. And this is probably an overshare, but when I was in college, I tried to pick up ballet for the first time. And literally no one should try to pick up ballet for the first time, like as an adult, but I did. And I was so earnest. I'm like, I'll come into the studio 5 days a week. I'll work really, really hard. And at that point, I was already really into writing, and we would go to see like ballet performances. And so I do write-ups and reports on that stuff. So at one point I asked my ballet instructor, I'm like, okay, if I just stick with it, like for all of college, is there any chance I'll end up being able to go on point, you know, in my life? And she was just like, honey, just stick with the writing. Just
Oh no.
very well-intentioned advice, but
I was told that too when I first started. I was told that I was too old, that you can't start when you're 21. You've got to start when you're young. And I disagree. I might not ever be in Cirque du Soleil though, but that's okay.
and to start them when they're young enough to be fearless, literally like fearless. You have no fear of falling. So were you in college too when you discovered like vampire shows, vampire books? Like tell us about how you got into like fantasy content.
Yeah, I think I sort of was. I think the first book I read, like after high school, like first book I read of choice, was a Court of Thorns and Roses, and I was in college. It was for like some book club that I randomly joined, and I was like, oh my God, I love fantasy. This was so fun. And then yeah, just kind of dove off the deep end trying to find any other fantasy related fix.
Did you ever go down the Twilight like fandom?
I didn't. I never read those books, but I watched those movies, and fell in love at the time, and all the other vampire. Yeah, I think I went Twilight, and then True Blood, Buffy, like all of those.
And there was so many. There was like a moment when vampires were everywhere and so popular. And then people were saying like, I can't sell vampires. We're saturated. No more. I'm like, no, it's like, it's one of those timeless things. We never get sick of them. We just want more.
I was one of those consumers though, where I was like, can I get anything other than vampires right now? Like there was a point, which is how I started writing. I was like, man, everything is vampires. There's got to be something else. But I now am part of the thought that you can't have enough vampires. It'll never be saturated.
When you joined that book club in college, was that like your first foray into fantasy romance, or had you been a romance reader? What's your background with books?
Yeah, that was sort of my first, like I didn't really read before that group. Outside of what was required for high school and college classes, I was very much immersed. Like I went to college straight out of high school, and I was taking way more credits than I was supposed to be, and I was working, and so I was not spending a lot of time reading up until that point, and then read that first book, and I was like, well, I'm making time for this.
And so do you have like authors that inspired you to write? Was ACOTAR really the thing, or had you been interested in writing even before you really got into books?
I had been interested in writing since I was really little. My first grade class had like a writer's workshop. My best friend and I would co-write like a book series together called Cake Land and Ice Cream Land. And so I really think my love for writing started there. And then I tried to write a couple books throughout middle school, and high school, and never finished it. I always like just got lost and then lost interest, and it kind of pittered out, and I think I also just never thought that it could be like a career. Like nobody ever told me like, you like writing, do it. And so yeah, it was kind of much later that I was like, I'm going to write a book, whatever. Maybe nothing comes of it, but I'm going to give it a go.
And so when you finally sat down to do it for yourself, like, was there something that inspired you? Were you thinking like, okay, I'm over vampires, I want to try this? Or was it the romance that you're like, what inspired you to do it and finally just sit down?
That first book, it was definitely like, I'm over the vampires. And I feel like there's got to be so many other fantastical creatures and supernatural beings that we could create and come up with. At the time, I was also, I had just gotten back from a study abroad trip to Guatemala. And so I was missing some of the people that I had spent like months with over there. And so I wanted to write something that was kind of like global and supernatural, and yeah, just kind of find an outlet for some of that like missing people.
Yeah. So when you develop like your magic systems and the lore for your books, do you do a lot of research, or is it really truly like invented? How do you approach writing each project?
I think each book is very different. That book was definitely heavily based on my own experiences and exposure to places and people. The book I'm writing now is I'm having to create a lot more. And so I am drawing from like inspiration, different books and different shows, and pulling from a lot of like D&D books, oddly, this time around. Every book is just so different. I keep thinking I'm going to get into a stride of like, this is just my process, but it's not. Every series has a different process.
And are you a big gamer? Like, do you play tabletop role-playing games?
Not a whole lot. I'm kind of just got into it within the last year, but I've always really been big into games in general, and probably more like dark fantasy kind of video games. So I feel like a lot of the world is very similar in with those things. But I'm steeping myself in the D&D world right now. I have been reading the monster manual and just different one shots and trying to play whenever I can too. So
that's the thing that's been so amazing, I think, about writing in this space is there's so much content out there that is so inventive. It's so easy to access. Like, you can jump on YouTube and watch some of the most amazing shows and just get inspired. Like, there's so many people who are so talented, have really made gaming fantasy cool again. Like, I am always surprised to see all the like the thirst for like Baldur's Gate 3 characters. Like, do you see?
yeah.
I mean, there could be there, and I'm sure there are. I should fall down that rabbit hole someday. Like, entire fandoms of just like fan fiction around Astarion.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
It's the greatest. It's the greatest. I really got into playing Baldur's Gate 3, which, I mean, probably a better hobby for me than ballet. I'm definitely not much better at playing video games than I am at dancing or athletics. But it's so, so fun and so immersive. And you just feel like you're in that world, which, I don't know, I would always choose a fantasy world over real life if I had the chance to.
Yeah, I have some friends who they play together, husband and wife, and they always talk about just their gaming styles are so different because he's like, it's like I have to build my character to the style and the class and race that it is, and then she's like, I'm just trying to like have relationships with all these characters I meet.
Well, that's the funny thing. Like, I don't know what this is, and I probably shouldn't go down the rabbit hole of like psychologically analyzing it, but the characters I love to play are so different from me. Like, I am a total loot goblin. Like, if there is a body down, I am going to search the pockets. But I'm not that in real life. Like, in real life, if I see money on the ground, I'm just going to be like, nope, not mine. Move away. But when I'm in the game, I'm like, I'm going to even take the lint. I don't care. It's so ridiculous.
I mean, it is. It's about living different. Like, you get to live different lives in fantasy worlds. It's kind of fun.
So is there anything that you haven't written about yet that you are excited to try? Like, you've done vampires, you've done dragons, amazing magic systems, and we'll talk about A Delicate Betrayal in a minute, but is there anything like on the horizon that you're like, ooh, I haven't done this yet?
I would eventually like to write something in Greek mythology, but I don't feel like I haven't immersed myself enough in that world to, I don't feel confident enough in it yet, but I definitely know that that's something that I want to do. I think also doing some kind of like sirens could be fun. I don't know. The series I'm working on now has so much potential in it that I also feel like I'm just, the world is my oyster right now.
So tell me about that series. Is that the series that A Delicate Betrayal is book 1?
Yeah. A Delicate Betrayal was sort of meant as this prequel. It was supposed to be like this short teaser novella. But the more I wrote it, the more I just realized that the main character needed her whole story told. So yeah, that was supposed to be like setting up the world of the main series and like why it is the way it is. But yeah, it kind of took on a whole life of its own. The series I'm working on now is always hard to talk about because I don't know if people have read A Delicate Betrayal, so there's spoilers if I talk about it. This world is like years ago was cursed. All the monarchs, the kings and queens, got turned into these crazy monsters, and this girl has been kind of kept away from it all, tried to keep safe her whole life. And it's her story about kind of branching out on her own and finally seeing the big bad world. And she's like searching for her family along the way, and trying to like make friends. And but yeah, so it's really a really big project, because there's so many different kingdoms and things for her to encounter and go through.
Well, A Delicate Betrayal, I am so glad it wasn't a novella because, again, I'll try not to talk about it with spoilers, but the main character, and I'll probably say her name wrong, but Queen, how do you say it? Anwen?
Yeah.
Anwen, she is amazing. And the thing that you do in that book that I think is one of the reasons I love reading fantasy so much is you balance, like, there's a lot of world building, there's a lot of deep characterization, but your writing is so well balanced. Like in places, I just got lost in the sentences and the descriptions. I'm like, oh, swoony, it's so beautiful. But it never bogs things down. You know, you have such a perfect touch when it comes to balancing the story, the action, the lore, and then those moments where you're like, I'm just going to enjoy the sentence for a little too long. It's a phenomenal, I can't believe it was supposed to start as a novella. At what point did you realize you were like, okay, 300 pages in, this is getting to be its own book?
I mean, basically, yeah, the whole time I was working on it, I was like, maybe it'll only be 25,000, maybe it'll only be 40,000. And then eventually, yeah, I don't even know what the final word count was, probably 100 though. But yeah, I thought it was going to be 5 chapters, and I don't know what I was thinking. I also, it was about half the size after the first draft, because I did have a friend read it and she was like, you need Darius's perspective in here. So his wasn't even in the first draft. And I really think that she was right. He needed his own voice.
Oh my gosh, he adds so much. And I don't know, readers are really polarized. Like sometimes they hate dual POV, sometimes they love it. And do you generally start in a single POV and then decide what the story needs? Or do you have a preference when you're writing?
I think I prefer to write 2 POV. Like I really get to understand the characters better that way. I try not to force it if it doesn't need it. So I think Shadow Crusade was only 1 POV, because I don't think that the book needed. Oh wait, actually, now that I'm saying that, I think the first book was 1 POV, but I think that later books had more. But like, you know, for that first book, it didn't need multiple people's perspective. So I really try and just go with what the story needs.
So what comes next in that series? Not story content wise, but do you have 1 book? Do you think it's going to be multiple books? Do you have any idea where that journey's going to go?
Not fully. I do think it's going to be at least a trilogy. I'm in the process of like trying to map out the whole series, like very broadly speaking. But and yeah, the more I've ventured into that, the more I've been like, well, maybe it's going to be more like 4 books. But again, well, I try and just follow where the story goes, and if it needs to be 3, then that's great, and if it winds up being longer, then go for that too.
And do you have any idea yet? Will you be moving into a release date soon, or top secret? We can't know. We have to stay tuned and follow you on social to find out.
Definitely follow me on Instagram, or sign up for my newsletter. It's probably the 2 places I share the most. But I'm hoping this year, again, that this series, although I did a lot of planning when I started A Delicate Betrayal, I've just constantly had to keep going back and replanning, or not replanning, but building more, because it is such a big world with so many different people and moving parts, that it's just the writing process has been taking a lot longer. So I don't have a firm date yet. I do want to get it out before the end of this year, though.
Time just flies, and I know that feeling so well, where you're like, oh yeah, I can finish this, and 7 months have gone by and you're like, I'm still in the same chapter. All right. Well, I would like to ask you just a few fun questions. They're completely frivolous, but we'll see what your answers are. So if you had to choose, so you only get to choose one, would you rather? Would you rather be in a marriage of convenience for life, or would you have to wear a ring that suppressed your magic forever?
Oh no. I thought it was going to be so easy when you said marriage of convenience. I was like, definitely not that. Oh man. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't want, if I had magic, I would not want it to be suppressed. That feels like such a waste. So I guess I'll pick marriage of convenience.
Amazing, amazing. And then if you were going to be bonded to either a vampire or a dragon, which would you pick?
Probably a dragon. Just flying in with the wind in your hair. That you just can't pass that up.
I was going to say it's almost a requirement for a fantasy romance writer. Like, if there's a dragon mentioned, we're in. It's done. Well, thank you so, so much for taking the time to chat with me. I adored A Delicate Betrayal, and now I have an entire, TBR list that I never anticipated because you've got a lot of books out there. Is there a place that you think for somebody like me? So I started with A Delicate Betrayal. What should I read next while I'm waiting for the next book in the series?
I would probably say Soul of the Crow. It was my second book, but just the world in that was really fun to make. It's probably still one of my favorite books that I've written. So that's usually where I tell people to start.
Amazing. That is going on my list today. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. I am going to be absolutely glued to your Instagram looking for your next release and all the fun updates on things you're doing. So, and I will also be very jealously liking your aerial videos.
Thank you.